That was the Cal varsity rugby team celebrating an undefeated season and second straight national championship after defeating Navy a little over a week ago. Considering that Cal Rugby is unequivocally the greatest program in the history of collegiate sports in any sport, it's probably not too surprising to hear that the first Olympic gold medals associated with the University of California were won by Cal Rugby players. But boy, oh boy, do we have a story for you today about how those Cal Rugby players earned those gold medals. I'm not going to spoil it for you, but about 100 years ago, the entire nation of France was ready to rip our players limb from limb. You're going to want to stick around today for our latest Cal History episode with Leslie Mitchell. Welcome to Tell the Whole Damn World. It's Monday, May 11th, 2026. I hope all of the mamas in your life had a wonderful Mother's Day, and it's another great day to be a bear. I'm your host, Reza Sirafinejad. We appreciate you tuning in, and I want to congratulate head coach Mike New and the Cal baseball team for winning a 3-game series on the road at number 23 Virginia. The Golden Bears came from behind in the rubber match on Sunday to claim their first ranked series of the season. Way to go, boys. We're the podcast that celebrates all things Cal. We produce on-camera interviews with the prominent people who are passionate about our university and our sports teams. If you're unabashedly and unapologetically all about Cal, you've found the right place. We hope to put a smile on your face and help you come away feeling good about your connection to the greatest university on the planet. If you like what we're doing here, please like and subscribe. And if you can find the time for it, please watch us on YouTube. We're getting closer and closer to 1,000 subscribers now, and that's a significant milestone to achieve as small content creators. We need your help to spread the word by telling your friends and the whole damn world about us. And before we jump into it today, I want to give a quick shout out to Raj, who had some very kind words to say to me at the Berkeley YMCA the other day. I really appreciate that. It's always nice to meet people who enjoy the podcast, so if you see me around Berkeley, don't be shy. Come on up and say hi. Without further ado, let's bring in Leslie, and we'll talk all about the Cal players on the 1920 and 1924 U.S. teams who won Olympic gold in rugby despite being overwhelming underdogs and overcoming a lot of obstacles the French threw in their way.
This week in Cal history.
Leslie Mitchell is our resident Cal history expert. She's a third-generation Cal alum, history major, and lifelong Golden Bear fan who writes wonderful articles about the notable people connected with our university who have done great things in this world. You can visit her website, calbearshistory.com, or follow her on X, also known as Twitter, at CalBearsHistory to learn more about the people who have been a part of the rich history of the University of California. I say it all the time, but we couldn't be more lucky to have Leslie as part of the show. Today, considering that the Cal varsity rugby team just completed an undefeated season and won a second consecutive national championship, Leslie and I are going to go in our Wayback Machine and share a very entertaining story about a group of Golden Bear rugby players from more than 100 years ago who won Cal's first Olympic gold medals. Welcome again to the show, Leslie.
Well, hey there, Reza. First of all, I just want to say I am not on X. I am only on Twitter. I'd like to point out, you said it was their second consecutive national championship for rugby. I think we would be remiss in not also saying it's their 30th national championship in rugby 15s. And
Right.
I believe they have 5 more in rugby 7s.
Under Jack Clark alone, it's his 31st national championship when you add them all together. So,
let's hear it for Cal Rugby. I mean, they're the
Right.
greatest. So, yeah, I thought it was really fitting that the rugby team brought home our first gold since it's one of our signature sports. So I started looking into it. I wrote an article a number of years ago that is now on my website about the 1920 Olympics, where we won our first gold, and I was just blown away by how insane the whole story was, and then followed up by the 24 games. It's just like unbelievable.
Right. No, I mean, when I read your articles, I was like, "What?" I mean, it's well, we'll get into it,
We'll get
but it
into it
is
indeed. I think the first thing people have to understand is that the Olympics were an entirely different beast back in the early part of the 20th century. They're not anything remotely like they are now. There was no television, obviously. There was no live radio broadcast, so there wasn't a big pile of money. It was all not only were they actually amateurs, but it was almost amateurish, you might say, in some ways, the way they were put on. Um, uh, in doing research on other articles, other stories about Cal Olympians, I came across all sorts of weirdo tidbits about the early Olympics, such as um, in the 1900 games, which were also in Paris. Um, one of the sports was croquet, and,
right.
which just in and of itself is weird. But the capper is they only had one person show up to watch. An elderly Englishman who lived in Italy and took the train to Paris to watch the croquet game. So I guess that's why it didn't last as an Olympic sport.
Well, yeah, that might be one reason, but I mean, the whole thing was not really very well organized, it seems.
Well,
Like, back in that
I mean,
era, it
come on, Reza. Tug of war was a great Olympic sport back then.
well,
Yeah, I mean, look,
but but it would stretch on for, like, months, right? It wasn't like a designated time and place for all of the activities. It
right,
kind of stretched on.
in 1904, when they were in St. Louis, I think it started in May and ended in October.
Yeah.
And
So,
they
yeah.
just had like random teams show up, and then for this or that sport, and then they'd go home, and then somebody. It was not a big event.
Right.
But by 1920, when we won our first golds, it had gotten to be a little more serious. You got some big crowds. What happened was the Olympics had been canceled in 1916 because of World War One.
Right.
And so the 1920 Olympics were in Antwerp, which, of course, Belgium was one of the real victims of World War One. People had fought over it, and they'd suffered a lot. So that's why they decided to put it in Antwerp. So I think there was a sort of a sense of a little reconciliation, and let's all get back together and do this Olympic thing. So it was a little bit bigger, but it was still very, very odd. And rugby in particular, it had been in a couple of earlier games, and then it had been dropped, and it wasn't quite clear whether it was going to stay on as an Olympic sport or not. And so it was decided they were going to have it in 1920.
Right. Well, and then just to also kind of mention it, I mean, at that time, I mean, the enthusiasm for the sport, especially here in the United States, was kind of not really all
It
that
I
great.
would say non-existent is
Right.
the appropriate word. Um, and I would say in the United States, it was always a big sport in, the United Kingdom.
Hmm.
It was a and in the British Empire countries, and to a lesser extent in a lot of the continent countries. But in the United States, the original quote unquote college football was really more like what we would consider rugby now,
Right.
back in the 1860s, 1870s. It wasn't really until the 1890s that they sort of got things like four downs and line of
Right.
scrimmage, and kind of things that we kind of think are
Right.
intrinsic to the game. But by 1920, it had really, they were two very separate sports. What had happened in 1906 is that football had been basically was on the brink of being eliminated as a sport in the United States because it was so dangerous. The rules, they just
Right.
allowed players to just like run full speed and crash into each other
Right. The
a lot.
flying wedge.
Yeah. And players died. I mean, I think in
Yeah.
1906 there were 18 players who died
Right.
in either college games or club games that were played that year. And so there was a lot of talk about just abolishing it. President Theodore Roosevelt stepped in rather famously and said, well, we got to make some changes. We got to fix this. And they got together and came up with rules to make it safer. But Cal and Stanford were not convinced. They decided it still wasn't safe enough. And they did abolish football. I think most Cal fans know that. We didn't play American football at all from 1904 until 1915. We started playing American football again. And Stanford, I think, didn't go back to American football until 1918.
Right.
So most of the rest of the country, though, continued playing American football. So basically it was California schools. USC also switched to rugby. Santa Clara switched to rugby. So there was like a nest of rugby people in California. And that was the only place in the country where it was a sport that was a big deal.
Right.
But by 1920, again, we'd gone back to football in 1915. So we weren't playing rugby either. But when the Olympics announced that they were going to have rugby, the California folks, the Stanford, the Cal, the Santa Clara guys, they all got together and said, we should go play. I mean, we're good at it. We play rugby. Let's go do it. And the United States Olympic Committee said, nah,
Yeah.
we're not sending a team for that sport.
Right. No, that was the thing that really tripped me out at the very beginning reading your article because, just the idea that here you had athletes who were willing and wanting to represent their country, and they're like, meh, nah, no. And ultimately, what ended up happening was they allowed for them to go, but they had to pay their own way.
Right. And they said it's only played in California, so California has to figure out how you're going to pay for it if you want to go.
Right.
And so they did. I mean, and it's sort of like, high school where they had bake sales and stuff. Not
Right.
literally bake sales, but they had like charity softball fundraiser games.
And a
My
dance.
favorite is they had a band called the Stanford Six Syncopators, which is not easy to say, down in Palo Alto that gave concerts where the money all went to the game. They got donations from the mayor of San Francisco, who was very wealthy, from the family of a former Cal rugby player named Charles Tilden. And the name Tilden might be familiar to people who have lived in the East Bay. Yes, that's his family. They donated money. So they scrounged up the money. Then they had to figure out on the players who they were going to have. And they got a lot of people who had played rugby at the local schools, Cal, Stanford, and Santa Clara. But they hadn't played in 5 years because the sport hadn't
Right.
been played.
Well, exactly. So, I mean, yeah, so these were athletes who, certainly knew how to play rugby, but they were probably admittedly out of practice because, the last time they really competitively played was a while ago. And, that's the other thing that really, when I think back on it, the idea of actually representing your country and going out all the way across to Europe to be able to represent the United States as this is the best that we've got, that it all came from Northern California, that this was the hotbed of rugby at that time because nobody else in the country was playing.
Well, a number of the players ended up they had 41 people try out and 22 made the team. So it wasn't what you'd call highly selective. And some of them had never played rugby before, and they just had to learn. The other guys had to teach them like what the rules were and how you were supposed to do stuff. They were all good athletes, but they weren't. I mean, we all know there's a big difference between being athletic and knowing how to play a particular sport.
Exactly. Sure.
And then they did the trip they had to take. They had to take the
Right.
train to New York, which was like a 5-day trip. Then they did some sightseeing in New York. Then they got on a steamship and they went to England. And then they hung out in England for a little while. And then they took a ferry boat over across the channel to Antwerp. And you think, that they didn't have time. They couldn't practice any of that time. You can't practice on a train or on a steamship, really.
Right. I mean, how long that trip? I mean, if you're saying maybe it took about 5 days by rail back at that time to get to New York, that's not too bad. But then crossing the Atlantic on board a ship, I mean, that must have taken some time. And I mean, it's just you
It'd
got to
take at least
figure it.
a couple of weeks for the trip. Yeah.
Right. Exactly. So, I mean, yeah, that just seems, and to have to pay it all out of your own pocket just for this experience to go and be really decidedly the underdogs in these contests. Because again, in Europe, you're talking about countries that took rugby much more seriously than here in the United States,
Well,
especially in that.
that's where we got lucky. We got
Right.
really lucky because the British refused to go to the Olympics. And again, it's just a reflection of the Olympics were not that big of a deal back then. And the British were like, nah, we're not going. They were mad because they wanted to have 3 teams. They wanted to have an England team, a Scotland team, and a Wales team. And the Olympic Committee said, no, you can have only one team. And the British said, well, then we're not going to go. It's not worth our trouble.
Right.
So that, and when the British said they weren't going to go, then all the other empire countries said, and Commonwealth countries said, we're not going. So we didn't have to play, most notably New Zealand, which is probably one of the greatest, if not the greatest, rugby team, the All Blacks from New Zealand, who had been in California on a tour in 1913 and had kicked Cal's butts. That's back when Cal was playing. 3 times they played them at the old California Stadium in Berkeley, and they just creamed us. So
Right. Right.
we were very fortunate we didn't have to play any of those teams. And in fact, we actually were very fortunate we didn't have to play hardly anybody because only 3 teams signed up to attend. 4 teams, I'm sorry. The
Right.
United States, France, Romania, and Czechoslovakia. And lo and behold, Romania and Czechoslovakia dropped out by the time our guys got there. And it was like, oh no, they're not playing there. So it's just, there's only going to be one game and the winner gets gold and the loser gets silver.
I mean, that's pretty good.
Yeah, I mean, Garrett, somebody missed the boat. They could have gotten bronze just for showing up. You know?
That'd be a heck of a participation trophy just to be able to walk off with an Olympic medal for just showing up.
And not winning any games. So basically the players, at least I gave them a little time to practice, but they like went on tour. They some of the players, and I should name all of the players, the Cal
Yes.
guys.
That's right.
Charles Tilden, who was of the Tilden family that we mentioned, he was the captain. George Fish, Matthew Hazelton, Charles Red Meehan, James Winston, and a guy named Colby Babe Slater, who also gets claimed by UC Davis because he was an agriculture major and did all his field work at Davis and played on some teams affiliated with what was then known as the University Farm. But Cal
Right.
claims him also because at that time he did classroom work in Berkeley and the degree was conferred by the faculty in Berkeley. So Davis claims him and we claim him, and I think that's legit. We can both claim him.
Sure.
So the 6 of those guys, there were 9 Stanford guys, there were 5 Santa Clara guys, and 2 guys who were from club teams in San Francisco. Slater in particular had been an officer in World War I and had actually been on the battlefields in areas very near to Antwerp. And they're spending their days going out and touring the battlefields and doing things like that. Which, I mean, the World War I had only ended 2 years earlier, less than a year and a half. So, I mean, it
Wow.
was not,
Yeah.
it wasn't ancient history by any means. So they finally get to the game day after like twiddling their thumbs for a few weeks, waiting for a game. And they played the French, who were huge favorites,
Right.
as you would imagine, because there was a sport that was regularly played in France, and it was practically a home game. Antwerp's only 200 miles from Paris. So the crowd of 20,000 was like 99.9% French.
And then stop right there. 20,000. I mean, that's a pretty good crowd to turn up for.
Yes, that was the second biggest crowd of any event at the Olympics. And please don't ask me what the biggest, because I don't remember. Probably something to do with the track and field, I would think. But
yeah, that's a lot of fans, and they were pretty raucous and rowdy, and absolutely were rooting very much for the French to win. They were the favorites.
And frankly, nobody thought the Americans had a chance. I mean,
Right.
when you look at the composition of the team, a bunch of guys that hadn't played in 5 years and a bunch of other guys that had never played before and were just trying to remember the rules.
Right.
But we had the one thing that saved us was it was really, really rainy. And the French played really aggressively, and it cost them because they kept fumbling the ball because it was so wet.
Yep.
And the Cal guys were able to pick it up. And, it was just it was kind of a mess, a big pile of mud. And, that was kind of the leveler between the teams. The United States team managed to pick up a French fumble relatively close to the French goal and kick it through the uprights, which gave them 3 points. Late in the game, there was another French fumble right by their goal, and our guy picked it up and ran over the goal and scored. And that was 5 points, missed the conversion. So the final score, USA 8, France 0.
0. And I
0.
mean, yeah. And I mean, the French did not take that very well.
Well,
But
actually, they were relatively gracious. They invited the American team to France to play a bunch of exhibition games, which shockingly, not against the national team, they were like against local teams, but shockingly, the Americans won 3 out of their 4 games that they played afterwards, and in various cities in France. So, the French weren't too bad about it.
I guess I'm projecting ahead to 1924, which we'll get to in a minute.
Yeah, we
But
will. Yeah, we will. By the one game the French did win of those exhibitions afterwards was at Paris. The French won that one 14-5. And there was a French player who had not been in the Olympics, who was the big star of that game, and his name was Adolphe Jérengui, is my best guess from my one semester of French.
I'm glad
Um,
you're trying it. Then I better you than me.
and we will hear more about Mr. Jérengui in 1924.
But yeah, let's talk about the 1924 rematch, essentially, between the United States and France. And so this is, flash forward 4 years
They
later.
come home, they go about their lives. They're not playing rugby because there's no rugby to be played. And by this time, the guys who had been on the 20 team, they're getting a little older. So most of those guys weren't ready to go back. They'd done it. They'd spent that long trip to Fulham that one time. They weren't that interested in doing it again. But the French remembered what had happened, and they actually sent a challenge to the Californians. And they said, we demand that you come back and play in these Olympics so that we can get our revenge and clear our names from this, bad thing that happened to us. And so the California guys said, okay, let's do it. But it was mostly different guys. There were some of them that were the veterans from 1920 that went, but there were a whole crop of new guys. So on that 1924 team, it ended up being 4 sturdy Golden Bears, and they were Colby Babe Slater, who we talked about before because he was on the 1920 team. There was George Dixon and Edward Graff and Ed Turkington.
Right. And Ed Turkington's jersey, if I understand things correctly, is on display at the Doc Hudson Fieldhouse there, right up at Witter Rugby Field, to commemorate that 1924 Olympic gold medal winning game against the French. Pretty cool.
And did you tell me earlier that there was also a French player's jersey that they have on display?
That's what I understand. They actually have both the French jersey and the U.S. jersey, the same number. I guess they traded jerseys, I think was the deal after the match. And
unexpected sportsmanship, as we will find out.
That's right.
Before I forget, there was one other guy on the team that's kind of interesting. That's Norman Slater, who was Babe Slater's little brother. And he did not go to Cal, but he had just graduated from Berkeley High right before he went off to the Olympics. So that's kind of funny. If anything, this bunch was even less experienced than the 1920 team because, again, rugby, another 4 years had passed since rugby had been a widely played sport in California. So most of them had not played the game before. And they did practices before they left to teach them the basic rules and to kind of get back into shape. The one advantage, though, that the California guys had that really was going to make a lot of difference was they were well conditioned. They were strong and well conditioned. And they might not know how to play the game, but they were very, very athletic. So off we went to Paris this time. And again, it was the same deal. You got to take the train to New York. You got to take the steamboat. This time, when they got to England, they stopped for a while. Again, the British didn't show up. The games were being played in May this time. And the British are like, well, that interferes with our rugby season. We're not going to quit our rugby season here to go play some stupid Olympics thing in France. And the American team played a number of games against the British while they were there, lost every game.
Sure. Yeah,
which is
they were good.
Kind of how lucky they were that the Brits didn't go. However, they were competitive. They didn't get blown out.
I love the fact that the British gave them some pointers and kind of helped give them some advice on how they could attack the French, because they had no love for the French, for sure.
The ancestral enemy, the French and the British. They get to Paris. There were 3 teams that showed up. The United States, of course, the French, of course, and Romania this time did show up, even though they backed out the previous time. That's right.
Right. But boy, poor Romania. I mean, they
didn't do well.
They did not do well. But at least they participated.
They lost 2 games and they got a bronze medal. I mean,
they got a bronze medal, right?
But things didn't start off so well when the Americans got there, because they arrived, their boat arrived, they took the boat over from England, and the French officials would not let them get off the boat. This is how it started.
Yes, I love this story. This is where it just starts to get kind of wild.
There was some problem with the paperwork, they said. And they said, you can't get off the boat. And they wouldn't let them off. And they finally, after 6 hours, the American rugby players said, the hell with this. And they, in their words, we formed a rugby scrum and forced our way off the boat. Much to the anger of the French press. What did they call them?
They branded the Californians street fighters and saloon brawlers,
which is perfect for somebody from the Old West.
That's right.
So things are already tense before they even got to Paris, because obviously you get off the boat, they have to take the train to Paris.
You had to fight your way off the boat just to get there.
So they get to Paris and they're already very unpopular. At first, the French played Romania and wiped them out. It was like 63-0 or something like that. And then the Americans played Romania and beat them like 37-0. So goodbye, Romania. So then there was going to be the gold medal game between the Americans and the French. The papers in France really got them worked up. They printed all sorts of inflammatory articles about how uncouth and bad and awful the Americans were. There was one newspaper that even claimed that the Americans had not actually won the gold medal in 1920, and that was all a big lie, and it was a conspiracy theory or something, apparently.
I was really surprised.
They had been in the Olympics, but then afterwards they came to France and lost the only game they played in France, and it wasn't even the Olympics, and they were wiped out.
Yeah.
Welcome to the age of fake news.
Right. Yeah. I mean, I was surprised even in that era, right, to have something like that where they made it sound like it was factual and whipping the crowd up into a frenzy, it seems, because the French, boy, we'll talk about that gold medal winning game, but we'll talk about it maybe after.
But we still have more buildup to go.
Yes.
So they're in Paris, they're in their hotel. The French will not let them practice on the practice fields.
Right.
They said, no, you can't. They were only allowed to practice in an empty lot that was near their hotel, which was somewhere on the outskirts of Paris. They weren't allowed to practice on a proper field. And finally, the Americans got fed up. Babe Slater said, come on, boys, we're going down to the Olympic Stadium. They went to the Olympic Stadium when there weren't any events ongoing, climbed over the fence, and went out and practiced on the field. Meanwhile, they had changed clothes and left their valuables and stuff in the locker room, and they'd paid a guy to watch it. but he let people in and all their stuff was stolen.
Yeah, all their stuff got stolen. Welcome to France.
And apparently, the American players said that they were booed and hissed every time they were recognized on the
Well,
streets of
and
Paris.
even spat at the hotel and just treated with so much disdain. I mean, I just find that. I mean, there's always that perception that the French kind of look down their noses at the Americans anyway. But I mean, wow, to just kind of imagine in that era of the French treating the Americans like that.
We have plenty of instances ourselves of sports fans acting really bad.
That's true,
But this, again, the papers were fanning the flames and whipping people up
right?
into a little nationalistic frenzy, I think.
Well, they must have done a pretty good job of it because, boy, when that gold medal game was played, I think it was what 50,000 fans showed up for it. Is that right?
Yeah, the French Olympic Committee actually got worried about the level of hostility, and they pleaded to the public for calm and sportsmanship, which didn't really work. They also raised the height of the fence between the field and the fans, and they had an extra 250 police at the game. So they also
Wow,
took some practical steps, which is a good thing, as it turned out.
I'll say.
The French were 20-1 favorites in the betting, which is pretty amazing. The game starts 5 minutes in, the French fumble the ball. Americans get it. They're able to kick the ball through the uprights, and they're ahead 3-0. Well, this, of course, makes the crowd even more angry. But things started to really get ugly when the big star of the French team, Mr. Adolphe Jean Gergy, he got just leveled by one of the American players. And the thing that was a problem, apparently, well, first of all, like I said before, the American players were just really much bigger and stronger and more well-conditioned than the French players. And they were used to playing American football, where the hitting is a lot harder than in rugby.
Right,
From what I subsequently read, they weren't illegal hits in rugby, but they just weren't how the gentleman's game was played in Europe. So
right,
they were really taken aback a little bit by the ferocity of the hitting,
right. The
and the
brute force
crowd
of it.
did not like it at all. So at that point, things turned ugly, and the French players started retaliating by, in the scrums, kicking and punching, and it turned into kind of almost like a fist fight on the
Yeah.
field. One of the American players was one of the Stanford guys. He got hit so hard in the gut that he had to be carried off the field, and he ended up in the hospital with internal injuries.
Wow.
So
Yeah.
it was ugly.
Turned into a really ugly game. Yeah.
And then, of course, the Americans weren't going to take all that sitting down. So then they were hitting as hard as they could. They weren't going to take it. One of the American players again hit the French star, Mr. Jean Vergy, but this time really hit him.
This was one of the U.S. players who played at Stanford and hit this guy so hard that it knocked him unconscious. He had to be carried off the field in a stretcher. And apparently, there were a couple of quotes in your story about one of the teammates saying that I thought that was the end of him, and just carried him off like a sack of potatoes. I mean, boy, he must have really been leveled. But I can imagine the French certainly when that happened, like,
Yeah,
just
all
that.
hell basically broke loose, and
Yes.
I mean, he was, not. I mean, you hate to see that for any star, any player, but he
Right.
was their big star of the team, and it
Right.
just it disintegrated from that point. Well, it already disintegrated pretty far. Let's be fair. The police had to protect the few American fans that were in the stands, and they didn't do so well. There were 8
Well,
art students.
yeah, they were attacked with canes apparently and beaten. And I mean, apparently somebody even said I thought they were dead or
There
something. I mean, they were like just
one of the
really
US players said, "I saw those guys and I thought the fans in the stands, I thought they were dead." And he said, "And I thought it was just a matter of time before they'd get their hands on us."
right. Right. I mean, man.
So they managed to finish the game. The United States, again, because of their conditioning. Again, I think we were oddly benefited by the fact that the game became so violent,
Yeah.
because it was a matter of strength and conditioning being more important than the skill of the game.
Right. Right. Kind of turned into more of a brawl than anything, it seems like, right? And
And ultimately, the Americans won it
17-3.
17-3. Pretty convincing score, really.
Well, absolutely. There was a great little write up by the United Press sports editor, Henry J. Farrell, who explained the magnitude of the American victory this way. Rugby is practically extinct in the United States. Many of the players who went to Paris and won the championship by beating the French team 17-3 had not played from the time they left Antwerp 4 years ago until they went out to train for this team. Under these circumstances, the Americans were presented with the same difficulties that a French baseball team would have in beating the pennant winner of the Class A League, let alone the winner of the World Series. What happened to the American boys from the time they arrived is well known, and it is too distasteful to be repeated. They got the rawest deal that any team ever got in any country, but they won. And if an American team ever earned glory for demonstrating every trait that America wants the world to regard as American characteristics, those football players won it. Their victory and their conduct under fire is the brightest entry that has been scored on all the pages of America's international sports records. Wow.
Cal guys.
That's right. That's right. Well, and Babe Slater, right? He was part of both gold medal winning teams in 1920 and in 1924, and he was a captain of that 1924 team.
Right.
Right.
And Charles Tilden from Cal was the captain of 1920. So we were the captains both times.
That's right. In addition to all the stuff that the U.S. team had to endure while in Paris, the French wouldn't allow them to film themselves, right? They did not allow the United States to film anything. Is that right?
Well, I wouldn't say they didn't allow it. They tried not to allow it. They told them that they were prohibited from doing it, which is really weird because, this was way before there was no television. So there's nobody has television rights. They weren't even movie rights or anything. It was just, I think it was just like being Starkey. They wouldn't let them film.
Right. Whatever they wanted, the answer is no.
Exactly. No. So they told them they couldn't, and that's where the American team said, "Well, we don't care what you say. We're doing it anyway." Right. And so, thankfully, they did. Even though it was another big dispute, but they went ahead and filmed it, and so we actually have some clips from the 1924
gold medal game. That's right. Yeah, we're gonna go ahead and show that to all of you right now. It's just a 2-minute highlight clip, but you can look forward to catching that right here, and then we're gonna come right back and wrap things up.
A few days later, they had a big banquet the French felt bad, the French Olympic Committee, about everything. And so they gave them a big banquet to the American team. Mr. Jean had recovered, and he was there, and he said he thought that everything the Americans had done was perfectly legal, and he didn't know why the fans and the press were so enraged about it. So he was very gracious. One of the fun parts is that among the attendees at the banquet was none other than the Prince of Wales, who was the future King Edward VIII of England. It's kind of weird that he was showing up at the American rugby banquet. But it was quite nice at the end. And I think there's a great quote maybe you want to read from one of the Stanford players who was on the team.
So yeah, many years later, the teammate from Stanford, Charles Doe, compared the 1924 rugby victory to the 1980 Miracle on Ice hockey win. Our victory in 24 made the hockey win against the Soviets look like an everyday occurrence. If we had that kind of coverage, rugby might be the greatest American pastime today. Wow, that's saying something.
I think it's true. I mean, for that team that basically didn't even hardly know how to play the game, to go over there and beat the French in Paris in front of a howling mob of 50,000 people.
Right. I mean, you talk about the odds being stacked against you to come away with a win, and a convincing win, right? To boot. That was really something. And I love this fact that apparently after those 1924 Olympics, rugby was dropped from the Olympics all the way until 2016.
Yeah, I think that I've speculated why it was dropped, and I think I come up with two possible reasons, or maybe both of them are. First of all, is how few teams showed up. I mean, how long are you going to have an event where there's like maximum of 3 teams competing? But I have to wonder if the behavior of the crowd and the violence of the game and just how terrible it all was, what a black eye it was, they just said, we're not doing this anymore.
That certainly could have played a part in making that decision. But I love the idea that it wasn't played again in the Olympics until 2016. So for 92 years, the players from Cal who won Olympic gold were considered the reigning Olympic rugby champions for all those years, because that was the last time it was played at the Olympics.
Well, you can argue because, as we know in the United States, there are separate championships for rugby 15s and for rugby 7s.
That's true.
And the new Olympic rugby teams play rugby 7s, whereas the traditional game is the 15s. So we're still the Cal guys and the other guys from that team. They're still the reigning rugby 15 champions.
I love it. There you go. That's great. Well, hey, this was a lot of fun, Leslie. I mean, I just think this was such an entertaining story to think of what all happened there in the early 1920s, far away from Berkeley, but to think that those rugby players from Cal won the very first Olympic gold medals associated with Cal. I mean, that's just, it's perfect, right? Considering
and the rugby players
success.
Are still winning championships, even as we speak.
Congratulations to Jack Clark and the Cal varsity rugby team. Thank you again so much, Leslie. This was a lot of fun. And I guess we'll end it the way we always end it and say, Go Bears!
Go Bears!
It's always fun to spend some time with Leslie. And isn't it cool to think that those rugby players are still considered the reigning Olympic champions in 15s? Thank you so much to all of you out there listening and watching. Speaking on behalf of all of us here, including Ahmad, Leslie, and David Ortega, we sincerely appreciate you. And speaking of Ahmad, the election is coming up on June 2nd. So if you live in Richmond, please give your vote to my co-host, Ahmad Anderson, to be the next mayor of Richmond. I can't imagine anyone more passionate about working to improve the lives of the residents of Richmond. He sincerely cares about people, has a tireless work ethic, and there's no question he will do wonders for the city of pride and purpose. This podcast is entirely a labor of love and a reflection of how much we love our university. Please help grow this podcast by telling the whole damn world about us. If you're just listening to us, please check us out on YouTube and subscribe to us there. And you can always go to tellthewholedamnworld.com to watch our latest episodes. We celebrate all things Cal and the prominent people who are passionate about the University of California. Do you feel Cal is the center of the universe? Do you bleed blue and gold? We want you to tell the whole damn world about it. Go Bears!